Good afternoon and welcome to the Value Economics Show. Happy Monday. In June of 1999, then President Bill Clinton declared the first quote-unquote gay and lesbian Pride Month. With the further mainstreaming of non-heterosexual relationships, Clinton supposedly wanted to champion this rising minority of Americans to bring awareness and space to their various plights and proclivities. Even though the mainstream view across even Democrats such as Joe Biden and Barack Obama was that a marriage was strictly between a man and a woman, a way was still made for this event to become celebrated at the level of the federal government. This announcement from Clinton was historically 30 years in the making. Stemming back from the famed Stonewall riots of 1969, the gay rights movement had just reached a fever pitch at the end of the 1960s, riding just after the civil rights movement had peaked and alongside the advancement of second-wave feminism. Gays, long marginalized to the fringe of society, wanted more out of life. They wanted acceptance, cultural relevancy, to be quote-unquote proud. The following year, in 1970, the first quote-unquote Gay Pride Liberation March, what we would call a modern pride parade, was held on the anniversary of the event. And this continued for the following 28 years until finally the federal government gave way. Even though they, at least at the time, held their ground in terms of parental rights and the proper constitution of a marriage, the government made way to acknowledge what would soon become known as the LGBTQ movement. In theory, there is nothing to bat an eye at about Pride Month. We have them all the time in our country for various reasons. June is also Men's Mental Health Month, for example, although for obvious reasons our elites don't feel the need to shout that one from the rooftops. Particularly in the case of minorities in our country, they are cultural mainstays. February is Black History Month. March is Women's History Month. May is AAPI History Month, apparently. And the list goes on and on. What's the difference with Pride? Why does Pride seemingly get a more harsh rap than the rest, some might ask? It took me very long to understand the why behind this, because I, for the longest time, didn't bat an eye at Pride Month. I was very much a social libertine, a quote, live and let live sort of person. Who was I told myself, to question another person's personal lifestyle? Wasn't I, quote unquote, impeding their freedom by commenting on what I dubbed it to be a social norm or not? Even in my early days of Christianity, I was convicted. Wasn't I supposed to, quote unquote, love my neighbor as the Bible says? It is the second greatest commandment, after all. These are the common reasons people give when any, and I mean any, pushback to Pride Month comes their way. They are mostly, in my view, given for good, honest, and noble reasons for the most part. They do want people to be, quote-unquote, live and let live in their own lives. They don't want to impede someone's freedom. They do want to, quote-unquote, love their neighbors. Therefore, particularly as a Christian, I, for the longest time, could not find a defense as to why value-oriented people, particularly those of a religious background, had such a pushback to Pride Month, at least initially. But then things started to change, particularly after the events of 2020, which I'm believing more and more to becoming maybe the biggest inflectionary time period in modern American history. Things around Pride Month began to change. Instead of merely marching to proclaim a heterodox value set, they, like many other minority groups, began to become more militant. Now, instead of asking for acceptance, they began to demand it. They began targeting the sexual proclivities not of adults, but children, sometimes even daring to shout, quote, "We're coming for your children," at their rallies and parades. Most curiously of all, the emphasis began to float towards the T in the LGBTQ acronym and away from the L, the G, and the B, which is what the movement was founded upon in the first place. No one can still tell me what the Q means, but that's neither here nor there. And what was obvious to anyone who paid attention, quote-unquote, Pride Month, was no longer just Pride Month anymore. Instead, what it was slowly becoming was Compulsion Month. You will accept us, the most radical of this movement said. If you don't, you're a bad person. You're some kind of a phobe or an ist or an ism. You will be smeared and tarnished, your reputation destroyed, your social standing among your more quote-unquote tolerant friends and neighbors completely pilloried. Your values are no longer welcome. It is this last point that is the only one that truly matters. The Pride movement, no matter what someone tries to tell you otherwise, is not about things like acceptance, big tent politics, and cultural cohesion. The only thing that matters about the Pride movement, just as the same as with any other, is values. It is the values of the movement that matter. Anything else besides that is window dressing, a distraction, a psyop, to prevent you from paying attention to what is actually mattering about that movement itself. So instead of talking primarily about assless chaps, drag queen story hour, and pride parades, we're going to be studying our focus today, talking about what has become the catch-all term for every single one of these, and more. Pride. Pride, to the modern contrary of the term itself, is not something to be proud of. It's a sin, the highest one you can commit, the literal root of all evil. This is not saying that all who shout it are evil people, because they're not. This is not saying that everyone involved in the LGBTQ movement is somehow a lesser human being, and they should be treated with lesser dignity inherently, because they shouldn't be. But what I am saying is the following. There must be limits to pride, as there is to everything. Particularly in the case of value-driven people, the only ones who are holding back the evaporation of everything traditional in society, we must not be afraid or ashamed to discuss what these limits ought to be. Our values have been declared as the enemy for far too long. If they can be quote-unquote proud of their values, it's high time that we follow suit. However, this must be done with actual argument and standing, not the screaming and yelling tactics of the modern insanity on either side of the discussion. We must discuss pride at its root, see what causes it, and dissect why it is actually a bad thing, not assert that it simply is a bad thing because we want it to be. That's pointless and stupid, as we've seen time and time again with every other issue under the sun. So that's a good enough place to start. Why is pride in general a bad thing? The biggest reason is because pride in all cases blinds you. It turns you away from reality, to the true, the good, and the beautiful, from the righteous things, towards things that are, by definition, not good, beautiful, or righteous. Your own hubris, your elevation of your values at the expense of the best values, becomes your downfall. Evidence for this, as is everything, is found in the only perfect thing on the earth and the ultimate source for all wisdom, the Bible. It is pride that convinces Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, believing that she can be equal to God. It is pride that convinces Adam that he does not need to assert dominion over the Garden of Eden, his own hubris that convinces him that, no matter how negligent he is, nothing evil can seep into the garden. It is pride that convinces Cain to kill Abel, the Israelites to reject God for the golden calf, for David to kill Uriah, and for Solomon to look back on his life as the supposedly wisest man who has ever lived, repeating one word over and over again: meaningless. But the best example of why pride is functionally incorrect, as always, comes from the namesake of the Christian faith himself. The Pharisees, the religious leaders of Israel and the pinnacle of elitist pride, question Jesus as he is teaching and tries to snare him in a trap of words. One of the Pharisees, believing they will catch him in heresy, asked Jesus what the greatest commandment of all the 613 in the Jewish law is, a seemingly impossible question. Jesus, in return, makes mincemeat of them in one of the most famous rebukes in all of Scripture, stemming from the Gospels of Mark and Matthew, and quoting the latter here. Quote, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." End quote. This is an extraordinary statement for multiple reasons. First, it's biblically accurate. Jesus does nothing here but quote the most foundational text of the Jewish faith, the Torah, specifically the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Second, Jesus somehow cinches up every single tenet of the Jewish faith, all of their most revered teachers from Moses to Elijah, with a couple of sentences. Third, he crushes any notion of religious pride with a snap of his fingers, saying that if you are enacting any set of values, religious or not, without having the highest values at the front of your mind, you are missing the mark by definition. And it is exactly that last point which is the most profound and the most prescient when it comes to the argument of modern pride. Steve Deace, one of the most important Christian thought leaders in the world today, sums it up better than anyone I had ever heard before. Deace, in describing the problem of pride in our culture today, has cited this passage of Scripture and its modern misunderstanding as the great sin not just of the pride movement, but of the entire modern evangelical church. We have exchanged the order of the first and second greatest commandments. The Bible, as mentioned, is the only perfect thing on earth. Christ does not make mistakes. He does not mince words. He just means what he says, completely and fully. In his rebuke of the Pharisees, Jesus was perfectly clear when he said that loving God comes first and that loving your neighbor comes second. If you do not consider loving God before you love other people, you are missing the entire point, and therefore sinning against people by disobeying God's love and God's law. So that begs the question, how does one, quote unquote, love the Lord with all your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind? The answer to that question can be found in John 21, the final chapter of what I believe to be the greatest book ever written and the greatest exemplar of what it means to be a good Christian in the first place. The scene is set on a beach after Jesus' resurrection. Peter, who had just betrayed Jesus 3 times after claiming outwardly to be his most loyal disciple and the rock of his church, has gone fishing to take his mind off the catastrophic events of his world crashing down on him. However, as he casts his net out into the water, he sees the resurrected Christ on the beach, abandons his boat, and swims to him from the water. When Jesus reaches the shore, he sees Jesus and apologizes for his betrayal, confessing his sins before his Lord. The night of his denial of Jesus, Peter was asked 3 times if he knew Jesus. Peter famously said no all 3 times. When he confronts Jesus, the first time he's seen him since, Jesus, as poetically as ever, undoes Peter's sins by asking Peter a new question 3 times, the same one Jesus proclaimed to the Pharisees about the most important commandment. Quote, "Simon Peter, do you love me?" Peter says yes all 3 times. When he says as such, Jesus gives him 2 tasks in response: feed my lambs and take care of the sheep. In other words, he commands Peter, who's a fisherman by trade, to act the part of a shepherd. The 2 main goals of a shepherd: take care of the flock and keep the wolves out of the pasture. If a shepherd does these 2 things, the flock will prosper. The exact same thing is true with the church and with people generally. If you feed a congregation the things of God, the church will prosper. If you keep sin out of the church, righteousness will prosper. If the heads of the church, the people following in the footsteps of Peter, the elders, pastors, and priests of the church, do not do these 2 things, the church will descend into apostasy and chaos. Just as the world will be and should, we allow the hierarchy of values that define a culture to be upended. This inverse cultural tyranny is exactly why pride should not in any way be celebrated in our culture. Pride is antithetical to value structures, to the very things that hold up our institutions. The fact that we celebrate it so openly is as definitive proof as ever. It's just how far our culture has drifted from a value-oriented cycle of living. It is not about hating a group of people because of their sexual proclivities. It's not that at all. It's about hating pride, which leads to sin. It's not enough to avoid sin. To really live a life filled with freedom, you must hate sin and everything that causes it. This is particularly true when we hone in on values. Throughout the common course of history, immutable characteristics have been a powerful unification force. This makes sense, particularly when you think about the pre-globalized world. African people bonded together because they were African, just as Europeans did with Europeans and Australians did with Australians, for example. But this was really, at the end of the day, the core of what these tribal affiliations based on? I would argue no. Instead, what tribal affiliations were based on were a core set of community and survival. If you happen to be the same ethnicity or look the same, that was fine. However, at the end of the day, it was all about coming together for a common goal and purpose for moving civilization forward. So given this, when you look at the so-called quote-unquote tribal nature of our current cultural landscape today, what does this actually mean? Quite simply, it means using immutable characteristics as an excuse to not talk about the more important things: values. In other words, it is an assertion of pride, the elevating of a set of non-existent, unimportant quote-unquote values above ones that actually matter, surrounding what people deem as important. This is a big part of the reason as to why our elites and ruling class are so sinister. There is a reason as to why they're so unserious about even attempting to solve any seriously pressing issue of the fabric of our culture, whether that be our debt ceiling or the increasing affordability of the American dream for young people or usury laws and our credit cards that are plunging into Americans into bankruptcy by the time they're in their late 20s. It's because they don't know how to fix them at all, as it turns out. Our elites have reached such a level of stupidity, such a level of gross incompetence, that the very problems their shareholders and voters have put them in place to fix are, to them, unfixable. It's much easier to talk about DEI or the amount of non-binary board members that you have at Citibank than to talk about why innovation in your corporation has ceased, why a product hasn't improved since you've taken over the helm, or why homeless people are still urinating in front of your local elementary school. One set of problems is far easier to solve, the other far harder. This is the result of a prideful society. When you get rid of values and exchange them for things that are inherently non-valuable, you'll get a society that elevates the non-valuable. You will get people who are non-valuable. This is not a good formula for any society that wants to be taken seriously in any form of endeavor. So, how do we solve this exactly? We're going to be talking about that this entire episode, of the problem of pride and what we need to do to deal with it. Because if we don't, our values will continue to deteriorate, as will the rest of our culture and society. A culture devoid of values is a culture devoid of anything substantial at all. An unsubstantive culture, one built on empty calories and promises, is one that is a house of cards. We should not celebrate pride, because pride is not a valuable thing at all. It's high time that we remember that, and we discuss a better alternative. for the betterment and for the good of us all. So I'm late on the Musk-Trump feud. I want to start there. So I haven't gotten to talk about this because it's all happened so fast and I've had episodes outlined and things like that. But I wanted to find a way to work it in because I think this is one of now the many. I'm recording this the week of the whole Iran thing. Well, we might talk about that in a couple episodes, who knows. But we are seeing now a series of fissures among the right. So I want to dive into this because I think this is going to actually make a really solid point about pride and where we go from this prideful thing we're going to be discussing this entire episode. So a lot of people have commented on the Elon and Trump feud, and I think that a lot of people have points, a lot of people don't have points. There are a lot of smart people commenting on this, a lot of stupid people commenting on this. And so what I want to hone in on is that this is, to me, and obviously there are things like, is it about government spending? Sure. Is it about is it about the Epstein list? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But what I think is the important thing to hone in on here is that this is the most outward display of prideful narcissism that the world has seen in some time. It's huge in terms of that. I mean, I've never seen it's got to be like, I'd have to think of a historical, like John Adams or Thomas Jefferson probably is the last biggest one, where these two massive cultural behemoths are just boom, 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 like back and forth with each other. And it's calmed down by now, but it was bad for a while. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to have like a heart palpitation watching this whole thing, kind of unfold in front of my face. And so again, like I said, this is really the first major battle of the war that is breaking out among the right, of like the fiscal hawks, of the libertarians, of the anti-war people, of everything of the neocons, all this kind of stuff. And we are going to have to hash this out to really see who is a true believer and who's not a true believer. But the interesting thing, I think, is that many, I think, on the MAGA, right, whatever you want to call it, the MAGA people, as I like to say, I'm proudly one of those people as well. But many people, what I find surprising is that they didn't see this coming, or they claim they didn't see this coming. They didn't see this breakup and split between Musk and Trump. And I don't understand why that is, because I did and several others did. And I was like, well, of course this isn't going to be something that's long-lasting, and there's not going to be this long-term government bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, because one, Elon Musk and Donald Trump don't think similarly at all about hardly anything. I mean, the only thing that they're really bonded together for is this Doge thing, which is, I don't know, I think it might be another psyop, who knows, and then, some of the wokeness stuff. But anyway, Musk and Trump really didn't have much in common anyway. They really only came together because they hated what the left was doing so much. And this is kind of why I think these fractions are breaking out in terms of the right and the MAGA movement right now. But I saw it coming, and the reason that I saw it coming, and the reason why I never thought this was going to last, was because of this reason. Was because of pride. It wasn't because of Doge. It wasn't because of like trans people or whatever, like all those things that don't really matter. What we need to realize about this is right now, and there's other people that obviously have a say in this discussion, but I think it is a reasonable thing to propose that the two most influential men in the world right now are Elon Musk and Donald Trump. This is a classic case of the Western movie from the 1950s, This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Two of Us. This is exactly what this was. And the fact that people did not think that there was going to be kind of a fractious relationship at some point between these two men with these gigantic egos. And I'm a Trump fan. I'm mostly an Elon Musk fan, although I'm still distrustful of him. I'm kind of neutral on Elon Musk, but I like what he's doing with Doge. But like I've known and studied Donald Trump for a very long time at this point. And the fact is that Trump does not like another person bigger than him in a negotiation. He makes people feel small a lot of the time because of that reason, because he is a New York real estate guy. He likes to hit people in the face and they don't agree with him. And Musk is the exact same way. Like I don't know if any of you guys read this Walter Isaacson biography of Elon Musk, but it was very insightful to get how the guy's personality works. And it was a real interesting character study in terms of how much of a dominant personality Elon Musk is. And is Musk weird and probably somewhat autistic with Asperger's and things like that? Spectrum of Lies out this week, by the way. Yes, definitely. But the reality is Elon Musk is as alpha male can get. And so is Donald Trump. And the fact that these two guys were kind of in relation with one another in terms of working together to fix the federal government spending problem or whatever, it was bound to happen at some point. There is no, again, this town ain't big enough for the two of us. And this is exactly what is happening right now. And I should be clear, and I think this is a fair point to make on both sides. There is fault with both Elon and Trump here. And again, I want to reiterate, Elon and Trump are both very disagreeable by necessity. So they are not agreeable people at all. You cannot be agreeable and do what these two men have done for a living for their entire lives, whether that's shoot rockets into space or build hotels up from nothing or run for president or, like create a new government agency out of nothing to trim the fat of all the fat cats in D.C. that are getting rich off of our tax dollars, basically. They're very disagreeable people because they're entrepreneurs. They're now both political actors and they're both effective at what they do. You can say a lot of things about Elon. You say a lot of things about Trump. You'd probably be right on a lot of things, but they are effective at what they do. They get their message across and they get shit done when they want to get shit done. They get it done. But they're also very immature because of the pride element of this. So Trump with the tweets and the truths, I should say. He doesn't really use X all that much. I don't know what his relationship with the platform is going to be now that Musk has taken it over. But like Elon's always been kind of an immature person with the memes and video games and all this kind of stuff. And this leads to, I think, what's so interesting about people looking up to Donald Trump and looking up to Elon Musk. And I look up to Trump in a decent amount, I would say. He's not like my hero or anything, but I think Trump's an admirable person from a lot of ways. Elon's a bit different, but in terms of his business success, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But what's interesting about the amount of young men, specifically, they're looking up to Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and that's a lot of people, a lot of young men especially, is that both of them have highly compromised value systems. You look at the history of Donald Trump going back, he's the most scrutinized person, I think, maybe in modern American history, modern world history, maybe. Everything about this guy has been overturned, from his sexual fetishes to his payoffs to the porn stars that he's, screwed over, or screwed, I should say, not screwed over, but maybe screwed over. Well, he's married, like to all of his stuff, like everything is out there about the guy. Trump he's been in 3 marriages. He's committed infidelity, God knows how many times. And with Elon, he's baby mama drama all the time. He's got like 15 kids with 6 different women. And which shows, and this immaturity and these compromised value systems, it shows in how they talk to their employees. And it shows how they talk to other men in power. Everyone is differential to Trump. Everyone is differential to Musk until they meet someone with that same seismic amount of force. And this is, I think, why Vivek Ramaswamy, even though he will never admit this publicly because he wants a future in politics, and I like Vivek, but he was forced out of Doge for this reason. It was the same exact thing. This town ain't big enough for the two of us. It ain't big enough for the two of us. And one of the two, Vivek or Elon, had to go. And I think Trump actually did him a favor because Ramaswamy's going to win the Ohio governor race, my home state, by a wide margin, and probably run for president in the future at some point. But anyway, so it's the same exact thing, right? And so you get alphas who are able to dominate people and able to say, and mostly in a good way. I'm not saying that like Trump is an asshole or whatever. Elon's an asshole, though they can be. But they have good reputations among a lot of people as well. But they have a dominant personality. The gravity of the room flows to them whenever they're in the room. And so this kind of attitude towards all of this has caused this massive outbreak and this kind of first shot across the bow of open warfare in the MAGA movement. This was, and I should be clear about this too, this was not avoidable. The people who are saying that, we can just live and let live and like not hash this out and just let these simmer. No. This had to be handled in some way, shape, or form, whether it's government spending or foreign policy or social issues or Israel or whatever the case might be. Pick your issue of the day. This was not avoidable, but it could have been handled better and more civilized, but it wasn't. The reality is it devolved into name calling and Trump saying, well, we'll cut all the government contracts for all of Musk companies. And then Elon was like, well, Trump's on the Epstein list and he raped a bunch of kids. I don't know if I can say this on YouTube, but he assaulted a bunch of kids, like he pedophile, whatever. And so then it just evolved into kind of these nonsensical bittering, and it kind of gave the other side, which, a lot of ammunition to use, which they're going to use, and they're going to be effective in using it. And all of this is a result, again, of the prideful arrogance of our leaders in this movement. So without proper headship, without proper leadership, without humble and humility in leadership, you will get misguided by pride in your leadership, and this will always be the end result of these things. A lot of people watching this, you've probably had a very immature boss before who has, he's kind of, played himself off or herself off as this kind of, de facto, like hard ass, like, oh, I'm going to get my way and do all this and whatever. And in reality, that person is very insecure and they power trip because they are not okay with themselves to some degree, which a lot of that is I know it's with Elon, and I'm sure it's with Trump as well to some degree, but I know it's with Elon. He has a lot of trauma from his childhood, a lot of bad things with his dad, a lot of bad things with, a lot of other things going on, with his whole upbringing and stuff. But anyways, so this is also buttressed by the fact that the two of these men, with both Musk and Trump, as well as others who have fallen into this category. I mentioned Vivek Ramaswamy and a lot of other people that are like that inside of this government, especially, and the power brokers itself and our ruling class in society. Like I said, they're surrounded by yes men, and they're surrounded by people that won't tell them no, which leads to this kind of, God complex sort of thing, like I can do no wrong, et cetera, et cetera. You're kind of seeing this now with the foreign policy stuff on the behalf of Trump. Like the second someone, goes against and say like, hey, we probably, should kind of cool it off in the Middle East a little bit. Then someone says like, oh, like they're betraying Trump, they're this, they're whatever, because this is the natural way of things, because no one wants to tell Donald Trump no. No one wants to tell Elon Musk no. No one wants to be that person that says, well, maybe you should cool it on the rhetoric, maybe you should cool it on the missiles, maybe you should cool it on this or that or whatever. And again, it is a prideful thing. Everyone can be called out when they're in the wrong and should be called out when they're in the wrong. There are no sacred cows. That is idolatry. That's idolatry at the end of the day. And this is why pride is such a disaster in any part of our culture when it seeps into anything inside of our culture, because we have had hardly anyone, and I mean anyone, check the people who set the tone for our culture. The people who are running everything right now in terms of the various institutions, they mostly have gotten there without pushback, which is why a lot of our institutions, our government, our businesses, whatever, they have succumbed to decadence, and why they have eroded on the inside and done a lot of things that, are not in service of the people that should be serviced by those institutions. And it's just the natural way of things. And so this is why, at the end of the day, this feud, even though it's settled down by this point to an immense degree, like I said, this is why it was as explosive as it was. Because whenever pride remains unchecked, whenever pride is left to run rampant inside of our institutions, inside of our leadership class, inside of whatever, it is going to explode. Because pride is the opposite of humility. Humility is the key to living, I think, a good life generally, but being a good leader, certainly. That's what, Jocko Willink has proven that over and over again with his work and all the things that he does. And Jocko is a great influence to a lot of people. It's a guy that should be heard of more, to be honest. But anyway, it's the natural order of things. If you are a prideful person, any conflict, any brush up against that identity of whatever that pride is propping up, it's going to be seen as a threat to you and you're going to lash out, which is proven with the two guys, the biggest pride problems in our world, probably, in Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and why that feud was so massive and why it shouldn't have been, but because of their pride, it ended up being so. So unchecked pride is the root of a lot of our cultural dysfunction. I would argue the majority of our cultural dysfunction. And what happens when no one checks your pride, or when no one checks the pride of somebody else, is that it runs wild, as you've seen with Musk and Trump. And it leads to this kind of interesting thing where we're now getting to the opposite side of pride, and we're going to talk about that later on. But now I want to kind of talk about the dichotomy of the two. So we've talked about pride, but now we're leading to another segment of what pride eventually leads to. And what people happens, they refuse to check their pride, even when they should check their pride, which leads to the quote-unquote unashamed group of people, the people who are unashamed, quote-unquote, of their actions. And this brings me to Glenn Greenwald. So Glenn Greenwald, a couple of weeks ago, around the same time as the Musk-Trump thing blew up, I think it was a little before, a little after, A video was leaked of Glenn Greenwald. For those who don't know, Glenn Greenwald is a massive independent journalist. He has a show on Rumble called System Update. He broke the Snowden reporting primarily. I forget who the woman journalist is. I apologize about that. But Glenn was made famous for that. And Glenn has been a trailblazing independent journalist since then. And basically, I think Glenn is probably the best living journalist today. I'd put Michael Schellenberger up there. I'd put Julian Assange up there. I'd put Matt Taibbi up there. I'd put all those guys up there. But there is a video that was leaked about Glenn Greenwald, and it was pretty disturbing, honestly. Like I knew, and Glenn is gay for people who don't know. So Glenn is a gay man, and he was formerly married to a man. And he's adopted 2 kids. He lives down in Brazil, actually, because he's like an expat from the United States, and he runs his operation down there, and he has a family down there and dogs and his kids now and stuff. So Glenn is a gay man, and he was videotaped with what turned out or looked like strongly to be a prostitute, and he was like saying a bunch of very, very sexual things, and he was like licking this guy's feet, and there's like a meth pipe in the background. It was a wild thing to kind of see. I didn't watch the whole video. I kind of just like saw, because I didn't want to see Glenn get debased in that way. I'm uncomfortable watching that stuff anyway, to be perfectly honest with you. But so this video comes out, and it came out, I think, for a reason, because this was, like all of these kind of leaked, scandalous things is a malicious attempt to take down a journalist. This is what this is. That is why the video was released then. So it's no, and by the way, in terms of when this was released, it was released, I believe, right between he gave an interview to Tucker Carlson and an interview with Megyn Kelly when they talked to him about the Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Epstein files stuff. They talked about Gaza. They talked about corruption. They talked about the Middle East. Talked about Israel. Talked about a lot of different things. And so Glenn is not afraid to touch any of those issues. And like I said, he is the best living journalist today, in my view. And great journalists, no matter who they are or what their beliefs are, they always come under fire for saying these types of things, for going against the established order. That's what journalism is supposed to be at the end of the day. It's not supposed to be a PR firm for those in power. It's supposed to check those in power. Same with comedians, which why a lot of comedy sucked for a while. But now it's reverting back to that. And so this is why Glenn got this video released at him, and it was a low blow. It was an awful thing to do in terms of releasing it into the public eye. And it was, shame on those people for doing that in terms of trying to destroy a guy's reputation, not on his record of being a journalist, but on his personal life. And like I said, I have no interest in getting anybody's bedroom. I have no interest in, telling people what their sexual politics should be, any of that. It really doesn't interest me in terms of the overall stuff. However, that being said, there is something that is concerning about this behavior that we need to address. So this brings me to Matt Walsh. So Matt Walsh went on Tucker's show about a week or 2 weeks before Glenn went on. Glenn's been on a bunch of times, but I think this is the first time that Matt has been on Tucker's platform after he's been on Fox. Matt was on his show on Fox a decent amount, not a terrible amount, but a decent amount. And so Matt Walsh went viral for a couple of things he said inside of Tucker's interview, because Walsh really can't help himself, I don't think, at this point, which is why I love Matt Walsh a lot. And so he went on Tucker's show. The most famous clip that came out of that interview was that Matt Walsh said that he believed that gay couples should not be allowed to adopt kids. That is what Matt Walsh said. And you can clip that. You can go back in Tucker's interview and listen to it. So he had a major, this is a bombshell moment for a lot of people. He's basically said, like, well, look, and Matt Walsh is a Catholic. Matt Walsh has 6 kids. He's very religious. His faith has really guided him throughout his entire life. He's probably the most devoutly religious person of the people in the company he works for, in the Daily Wire. Shapiro's up there, obviously. Michael Knowles is. But anyways, Walsh is a very devout Catholic. And in his view, gay couples, men or women, should not be able to adopt kids. And so bring it back to Glenn. Glenn is gay. He has 2 children. He was married to a man for a long time. His husband passed away, I believe, last year or 2 years ago. He got sick and died very young. He was a lot younger than Glenn was. And that was very sad. Obviously, it's sad when your spouse dies in any case. And so Glenn clipped that interview. And Glenn and Tucker are really good friends. But he clipped that piece, and he went after Matt Walsh really hard. He called him bigoted. He called him anti-gay. He called him homophobic, which really is kind of rich. and hilarious and hypocritical, given Glenn's constant banter against the types of things that he opposes on issues that he champions. I put out a tweet after this saying, every person can play the "I'm not offended" card until there's sacred cows on the altar. And Glenn's obviously inside of this, his sexuality is his one that he wants, the hill that he wants to die on. And so he goes after Walsh really hard on this. And then a couple of weeks later, the video of Glenn gets leaked and released. And then Walsh kind of claps back at him and said, like, well, I told you this is why everything else is. And so this video leaks and it goes crazy viral. And people are seeing it everywhere. People are talking about it. People on the left, people on the right, people, whatever. And so Greenwald puts out a statement. Small thing, not anything huge. And he basically says, like, hey, the video is real. This antics, whatever, this is kind of a personal thing, but it got leaked. I'm trying to find out who leaked it. I believe he said that they found the person, or they were zeroing in on the person, which would be a good thing. But when Glenn issued the statement, the key word that I found very, very interesting was unashamed. He said he was unashamed of what was in that video. And that is what we need to focus on. That is the key issue. That is why pride is a problem, particularly in America. We have no longer allowed any concept of shame, any sense of shame, good or bad, to have a place in our culture. We have done everything to remove shame at all, any consequences of lingering feelings, of any choice that you make. If it's the right issue, you should be, quote unquote, unashamed of it. You shouldn't feel bad about what you did. So essentially, again, I'll preface this. People are free to do what they wish in their personal lives. No government, no corporation, especially no power structure, should be able to infringe on your rights and what goes on in your home, particularly in your bedroom, okay? Like, I do not want the government, there's that hilarious Family Guy episode where the FCC comes in and basically censors everything in terms of, like, the Peter and Lois' sex life and all that kind of stuff. No one could swear anymore, all that sort of thing. And do I have my views on this? Obviously, I'm a Christian. I do not believe in gay marriage. I don't believe in any of those things as a formalized marriage, as an institution between a man and woman, etc. We can get into that all day. But I am, in terms of a government issue, you can do whatever you want to do inside your bedroom. I really don't care. I would prefer, obviously, that you not sin and do that, but that's just my theory. But anyway, this is not the case with Glenn Greenwald. And so this video's out there. It is out there. This video will live forever. It will forever be a stain on Glenn Greenwald's legacy. And again, this is saying nothing about his journalistic integrity, because I believe Glenn to be the best living modern journalist in history. I want to make that abundantly clear. I have no problem with Glenn's journalism. His journalism stands alone. But this video is out there. It will affect him. It will affect his children. It will affect his show. It will affect his company. It will affect his standing in terms of how seriously his journalism is perceived. And the reality is, like anybody else who this scenario has faced, Glenn Greenwald should feel shame about this. He should not be unashamed. I have had things about me leaked on the internet, naked pictures leaked on the internet. I've been sextorted before. I've called the police about it multiple times. I did not say I was unashamed. I'm very ashamed about that. I'm very ashamed. And people should be ashamed, because that's wrong. And Glenn Greenwald should feel shame about this. He defaced himself. He defaced his children. And moreover, that's what I want to focus on. He is raising 2 young boys right now as a single dad, essentially. And he's got this random male prostitute who's saying that, he's like licking this guy's feet, and there's a meth pipe in the background. There's drugs. He's degrading himself on camera. He's dressed in a maid's outfit. And it's like, really? Like, you're not ashamed of that? Like, a little bit? You don't worry about how that's going to affect, like, your kids are going to see that one day. You're Glenn Greenwald. You're the biggest living journalist today. Like, you're really not going to feel shame about that? You really don't think that that's going to matter to you, to your boys, to those young kids? Like I have a lot of questions. I'm sorry. So where does this lead? That's the biggest thing. Where does this lead? Are his children safe? Like there's a lot of questions here. And again, I can't be forward about this enough. I respect Glenn Greenwald tremendously. Tremendously. There are not people as brave as Glenn Greenwald in the journalistic establishment today. Glenn should be commended for those things. I believe he is one of the most indispensable people that we have in our culture right now towards guarding the truth, the capital T truth. But the truth that Glenn Greenwald will never fess up to is that there is such a thing as shame. You should feel shame about things. You should try to do better about things in your future, about your life. And that is a truth that Glenn Greenwald will never fess up to, because Jason Whitlock was talking about this. I think this is right too. He is so steeped in his sin problem, as we all are. Glenn Greenwald is a deeply sinful person. I am a deeply sinful person. We all are deeply sinful people. But the difference is, I will admit that. At least I hope I do, God willing. But Glenn Greenwald will never admit that, because he doesn't want to admit that he has pride in this area and that what he's doing is wrong. You cannot solve pride without having a sense of shame about your actions. If you believe truly that your actions have no consequences, you will never have a prayer of solving your sin problems. A sense of shame is absolutely necessary to combating pride. If you don't have shame, you will never fix anything about your prideful actions and all of the bad things that come from them. But given this topic of shame, I do think that with anything, we can take this to excess and we can take it too far, because shame can devolve into a bad thing and often does. And I think we need to talk about the two sides of the shame coin now that we've kind of moved from pride to shame, because I think this is how we can actually fix pride. And like I said, pride needs shame in order to be fixed. But generally speaking, there's a way to go about this that I think is more strategic than people are generally speaking used to. So in general, there are two combatants of pride that need to be discussed and dissected when it comes to this. And those two things are shame, which you already mentioned, we'll talk about that a little bit more, and conviction, which is similar to shame, but different from shame. We're going to talk about those because one is, in the long term, is a good thing. One in the long term is a bad thing. One is good for you and one is not good for you over the span of time. So what most people think the answer to pride is to feel shame. And in some ways, I do want to give this argument, I don't want to totally throw this argument out. In some ways, this is correct. The answer to pride, as I just mentioned myself, is to feel some sort of shame, some sense of, man, I really screwed up there. Like that's not right. I shouldn't have done that, etc. And the person, ironically, that brought this up to me a couple of years, very long time ago, actually about 5 or 6 years ago at this point, was Dan Crenshaw. And I made a video about Dan Crenshaw. I don't like Dan Crenshaw at all. I think he's kind of a disgraceful person in many ways. But I despise everything about Dan Crenshaw's politics. But in his book that he wrote 5 years ago, around then, he was dead right, because in one of his chapters, he said we need to have a quote-unquote right sense of shame. And Dan's absolutely right about that. He's absolutely right about that, because when we miss the mark and when we do things that that's what Jordan Peterson's definition of sin is. I think that's a good one, is when we miss the mark on doing something either not good or not to the best of our ability, etc. When we do things that put us, our families, our culture in a bad spot, we're going to feel bad about that, which is called shame. We should feel shame about that. Shame at the end, like in itself, it is not a bad thing. But that said, shame also cannot be the end point. It cannot be the end. It is only a means. If we treat shame, as an ends and not as a means, your life will be miserable. And I don't want people's lives to be miserable. It's hard enough as it is out there. But the reality of all of this is that shame leads to a lot of bad things down the line if it is not fixed and put in its proper place. Shame leads to isolation, it leads to self-loathing, and it leads to, most importantly, a complete cutoff from self-improvement. That's the thing. I think the deepest problem with shame in the long term. So shame in the short term, it's like, man, I shouldn't have cheated on my test. I shouldn't have, looked at pornography. I shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. Name your sin of choice. We all got them. But if you allow that to be internalized, that's when it kind of degrades and goes off the rails a bit. So, and the reason behind this is that shame, if you leave it unchecked, just like pride in an interesting way, it becomes your identity, just as your pride does. So shame should be an emotion. It should be a temporary thing, just as pride should be. But if you internalize that to become an identity principle, I am a shameful person, that's a whole different story. And that's when this starts to really, really get dangerous. Because what happens when you take that on as an identity is that you believe, because you are a quote-unquote shameful person, and you are your shame, that's a better way to phrase it, I think, you feel that you are completely unworthy of being helped. You don't believe that you can or should be helped. You don't believe that you deserve a better for yourself, that you can overcome the thing that allowed you to fall into whatever pattern you were falling into. So, if you cut yourself off from a better life, you will devolve further into your own degeneracy. Because if the better parts of your life are cut off from you, from your own doing, because you believe that you're not worthy of them, the only thing that's left is your degeneracy. That's the only thing that's left. And you will devolve further and further and further. This is how pornography works, by the way. So pornography, the first time that people watch porn, they're like, oh, it's just, it's innocent, it's whatever. But afterwards, I am a firm believer, and people say that this is inaccurate. I don't believe it is. For the vast majority of people, after you watch pornography, and I've been there way more times than I care to admit, you don't feel good after watching pornography. You don't want to shout it from the rooftops that I just got myself off to a video of naked people on the internet. You don't feel that way at all. But what oftentimes happens is that, people just say, you know what, fine, I'm a bad person, I'm a piece of garbage, what's one more video? One more video, one more video, one more. I'm going to watch this more debased thing. I'm going to watch this more depraved thing, this more. This is what happened to me. I'm speaking from experience here. At the end of my odyssey, if you want to call it that, it's a weird word, my soiree, whatever you want to say, into porn addiction, I got to a place where I was so disgusted with what I was watching that I'm like, oh my God, how in the heck did I get here? It's because of shame. Shame is the reason. And that's with drugs, that's with alcohol, that's with cheating on your wife, that's with any sin pattern in your life. If you allow shame to dominate your sin, just like pride, you will have more of that. It's not good. It's not a good pattern. So this leads us to the second point on this. So instead, the proper end place of shame, instead of this being flopped, is conviction. So conviction and shame are similar, but they need to go in their proper order. So conviction should not be a means to the end of shame. Shame should be a means to the end of conviction. So what is conviction? A lot of people don't know what that is. A lot of people use it in a religious term, like, man, the pastor really convicted me today, all that sort of thing. So conviction, my definition for it, is when you feel shame, discover a new path forward, and make your way to setting yourself up right. So conviction is saying, okay, I did a shameful thing, I feel bad about it, but I'm going to course correct. I'm going to move forward in a way that is better. I'm not going to stay in my shame. I am not my shame. I'm not what I've done. My identity is set apart from that, particularly if you're a religious person, particularly if you're a Christian. You are not your shame. You don't internalize your shame, just like you don't internalize your pride. So you feel your shame. I did a shameful thing. You discover a new path forward, and you make your way towards setting yourself up right in that way. Further on this, you clean up your future activity. You wipe clean your future behavior. So shame does not find a way into your heart again. So instead of going back to the porn, to use that example, you say, you know what? I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to go get some help. Whenever I'm feeling a lustful urge, I'm going to text a friend, and we're going to talk on the phone for 10 minutes. Whenever I want to cheat on my wife, I am going to call her and say that I'm feeling a certain type of way. Whenever I want to binge eat, I'm going to, say like, hey, am I really hungry? I'm going to drink a glass of water, whatever it's going to be. Whenever I want to hit a pipe or hit a bong or whatever, it's like, well, what am I medicating here? Processes, differentiation. That is the way that you get away from shame and towards conviction. You fix the actions. It's not about just the feeling of everything. It is about the actions of everything. And obviously this is a better strategy. I hope everyone can see that by this point. But unfortunately, conviction is not discussed a lot in our culture, mostly because it's a religious concept and we hate religion in our country, which is highly unfortunate given its need. But conviction is, if more people knew about what conviction actually is and they kind of used and put it in its proper context with shame, that's going to be a better route for everybody. I'm fully convinced of that. So conviction can only take place. However, this is the hard part. And this is why I think religion is so important in this discussion. That's why conviction is it's not a religious concept inherently, but it's used a lot in religious senses. Conviction can only take place. This is the kicker. And this is where we loop back to pride again. When you have an alternative set of values that are definitively better than the ones that lead to shame. That is the only way conviction can happen. You know what? I value my purity, so I'm not going to watch the bad video of naked people on the internet. I value my sobriety. I value being, present here, so I'm not going to hit the bottle. I'm not going to light a spliff up, black and mild, do whatever. I'm not going to, cheat my time at work by saying that I'm checked in when I'm not, and I'm not just going to, binge YouTube for 4 hours and say that I was working, all that sort of thing. So this is where the rubber meets the road in this whole problem. Values are the only way to fix the shame issue. They are the only way to fix our problem of shame. It's the only way. If you do not have values, you have no hope of getting out of your shame. Values are the answer for everything, but particularly with something like shame, because if you do not have something better that you are aiming towards, you have no hope of getting to a place that's better than where you are. And you will be stuck in your shame, which is as someone who's been there, it's a really awful place to be. And I'm sure a lot of you have been there too. So it's not a good place to be. I'll just put it that way. Okay, so values are the only way to combat shame. That's the biggest thing. So if you want to get rid of shame, you need to adopt values and stick to your values. So value-oriented living and a lifestyle defined by your value system are the only ways that you can truly rid yourself of shame. Because why shame happens is because you live by a set of lower values, of non-elevated values, particularly religious values, which leads to people dwelling in a place of lower values, so they feel themselves of lower value, and they feel hopeless, and they feel like there's no end. I'll be hooked on porn forever. I'll be hooked on weed forever. I won't be able to get a girlfriend. I won't be, whatever the case might be. So there needs to be a sense of value orientation to get yourself out of shame. Because if you do not have values, you have no hope of escaping your shame. You will internalize your identity as that thing, whatever that thing is for you. That will happen. It's not an if, it is a when. It's probably happening for a lot of you right now. So if you want to fix that, there are a couple things you need to do. First, you need to know and you need to understand that you are more than your shame. You are not your shame. I will repeat it over and over again. You are not the things that you have done if you allow it to be that way. You are not what you have done. You are not your shame. Big if here, if you correct for better actions. People are defined, and human beings are mostly defined. This is the rubber meets the road with anything. The number one factor in where a person ends up is defined by the choices that they make and the values that you follow. Period. End of story. If you want to know where someone's going to end up, look at their choices, look at their values. That will tell you everything you need to know about that person. Everything. I don't care who they vote for. I don't care what company they work at. I don't care who they support in terms of, I don't care what religion they are. You look at their values, you look at their choices. That will show you where that person ends up, guaranteed 100%. So, if you do not stay in your shame, if you choose differently, to act upon your shame differently, and if you value things that get you away from your shame, that is a good thing. But none of that matters. Your choices do not matter. Your values do not matter if you do not believe that you are worth fixing. If you internalize your shame, if you keep it to yourself, if you do not talk about it, if you do not let it breathe, you will be your shame. And you will say, I'm not worth fixing. But I am a Christian. I believe all humans are made in the image of God. What God says about me is far more important than what my shame says about me, than what any person on the internet says about me, any commenter on YouTube, whatever. And most of you guys are nice people, so thank you for that. But anybody who comments on my reels, who says that Sam Lacrosse is a loser, who says that his business blew up, whatever the thing is, whatever the criticism of me is, and there's a lot to criticize. There's a lot there. I don't really leave I leave a lot of meat on that bone, I'll put it that way. But none of that matters, because I believe that God loves me, and I believe that I am not my shame. And you don't have to be a Christian, even though I highly recommend that you are. But if you believe that you are something other than your shame, you will fix yourself. You will have a chance to fix yourself. You are worth more than your shame. You are not your shame. You are worth fixing. So if you're in a sin pattern, if you are in a pattern of pride, you are worth fixing if you make different decisions. Secondly, you must know that to overcome your shame, whatever causes you shame, you need to change. It is not a if, it is a need. Not a want to, it is a need to. Change is hard for a reason. I'll put it that way. And most people do not do it. Most people do not change for that reason, because it's hard. It's difficult. But the reality is about shame. If you want to get away from it, if you want to overcome your shame, if you want to truly separate your identity from your shame, you must change. You must do something different. You must adapt. You must move. You must go. Or you will keep getting these same results over and over and over and over and over again. You will make no progress towards the ultimate goal. I want to be free from porn. I want to stop smoking weed. I want to get a job, whatever that thing is. You will make no progress if you do not change towards the ultimate goal, whatever it is, sobriety, a marriage, a business, whatever that's going to be. So what is the ultimate goal that you need to remember in this scenario? A better life, because of overcoming that shame to get to that thing. It is living a life that is better for you. It is better for those who love you, particularly if you're married, particularly if you have children, as I said with Glenn Greenwald. Be better for those that you love. Be better for those who are around you. Number 3, tying a whole bow on this whole episode. Pride is overrated. Pride is overrated. There are some instances, I should make this clear, where you should feel proud, because accomplishments, because merit, because achievement is good. You should celebrate that. Make a great sale at work, go and buy yourself a steak. Grab a beer with the boys. I don't care. But, and however, just like shame, you cannot take on pride as an identity, because oftentimes, as we prove with Glenn Greenwald and probably Donald Trump and Elon Musk, where people run to when they feel shame, when they do shameful things, is to pride. It's a pendulum that swings back and forth like this. You cannot take on pride as an identity, just like you can't take on shame as an identity, because it separates you from your values, from the permanent things, from the things that guide your life, that should guide your life. Because when your values are set aside on behalf of your pride, that is when the wolves come to your door and hijack it. This is where we get people saying in pride parades that we're coming for your children. This is where we get serial philanderers and infidelity This is where we get drug addicts, porn addicts, whatever your drug of choice is. Pride is overrated, as is shame. You should not take pride on as an identity. You shouldn't take shame on as an identity. Take your values on as an identity. That's the only way to combat this. That's the only way to face this. Because if you don't, the wolves will change it for you. And they will hijack it, and they will make your life hell in either way. Choose values. Don't choose pride. Don't choose shame. They're both overrated. Value-oriented living is the only way to be successful in life. The only way. Don't try to cheat it. Thank you all for watching. Own the day. Open your mind. See you next week.